The kitchen window framed the October morning like a painting I'd grown tired of looking at. Frost kissed the pumpkins scattered across my 40-acre farm, their orange bellies gleaming under a sun that still held summer's warmth. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and wondered when this view had stopped bringing me peace. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. At 62, I should have been content. The mortgage was paid off, had been for 8 years now. The farmhouse needed work. Sure, but it was mine. Every board, every stone, every memory carved into its walls belonged to me. I'd raised 2 boys here after their father died in that car accident 15 years ago. I'd planted every apple tree, mended every fence, and survived every winter that tried to break me. But contentment felt as elusive as the morning mist burning off the fields. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. Alexander's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened with the familiar knot that came whenever my younger son called these days. "Morning, Mom." His voice carried that forced brightness I'd learned to distrust. "Alexander," I kept my tone neutral, waiting. "Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about the farm." There it was, the same conversation we'd been having for months, dressed up in different words but always circling back to the same demand. I moved away from the window, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. "There's nothing to follow up on, honey. I told you." "Mom, just hear me out." The brightness cracked, revealing the impatience underneath. "Isabella and I have been working on the numbers, and this opportunity isn't going to wait forever. The tech startup scene is moving fast." "Then find another way." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. We'd been down this road too many times. A pause. Then Isabella's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. I caught fragments stubborn and doesn't understand. Alexander cleared his throat. "Mom, you're too old to understand dreams like this. The world has changed. Sitting on all that land when it could be turned into something meaningful. Too old." The words hit like a physical blow. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping the phone tighter. Too old to understand dreams. "I didn't mean," Alexander backpedaled, hearing my silence. "Look, that came out wrong. But Mom, you're 62. What are you really doing with 40 acres? When was the last time you even planted more than that little vegetable garden?" Each word was a small knife, precise and cutting. He wasn't wrong about the farming. I'd leased most of the land to neighboring farmers for the past 5 years. But he was wrong about everything else. "This land isn't just an investment, Alexander. It's what Dad would have wanted," he finished for me, and I could hear his eyes rolling through the phone. "I know you've said that 100 times, but Dad's been gone for 15 years, and you're living in the past." The line went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. 15 years. Had it really been that long since Jonathan's funeral, when I'd stood in this same kitchen surrounded by casserole dishes and condolence cards, promising myself I'd hold on to everything he'd loved? "Isabella wants to talk to you," Alexander said finally. "She thinks maybe she can explain the business plan better than I can." Woman to woman. I don't need anyone to explain anything to me. But even as I said it, I could feel my resolve wavering. Not because I was considering their proposal, I'd never sell the farm to fund their pipe dream, but because Alexander's words had lodged themselves under my skin like splinters. Too old to understand dreams. Just think about it. Okay, Isabella's really excited about the possibility of you being involved. She says you could be like a silent partner. You know, part of our success story. Our success story. As if my 40 acres of sweat and memories were just another line item in their business plan. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen that had witnessed every important moment of my life for the past 25 years. The table where Alexander had done his homework, where I'd taught him to tie his shoes, and where we'd sat across from each other planning his high school graduation party. The counter where I'd kneaded bread every Sunday, where I'd cried over bills I wasn't sure I could pay, where I'd celebrated the final mortgage payment with a glass of Jonathan's best whiskey. Too old. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alexander, who'd lived off my generosity through college and his first 3 failed business ventures. Alexander, who'd brought home Isabella 2 years ago like a trophy wife and immediately started treating his childhood home like a resource to be mined. Isabella, with her perfectly straightened hair and MBA from a school I'd helped pay for, who looked at my farmhouse like it was a quaint museum piece and my land like it was wasted potential. I walked to the living room mantelpiece and picked up the framed photo of my boys from Nathan's college graduation. 18-year-old Alexander stood tall and proud next to his mortarboard-wearing older brother. Nathan had that serious expression he'd worn since childhood. My responsible one. My steady one. My adopted son, though we'd stopped using that word years ago. Nathan, who called every Sunday without fail. Nathan, who sent postcards from Europe where he'd been working for the past 2 years, building his legal career and writing about how much he missed my apple pie. Nathan, who'd never once asked me for money or questioned my choices or suggested I was too anything. The contrast stung. I set the photo down and noticed my hands were shaking slightly. When had they started doing that? Another sign of age. Another reminder that Alexander might have a point about time slipping away. But time for what? To give up everything I'd worked for so he could chase another get-rich-quick scheme. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. I'd always loved this time of day, when the light turned everything soft and forgiving. But today it felt different, like a spotlight on everything I was losing, everything I'd already lost. My phone buzzed with a text message. Isabella, hi Evelyn. Alexander told me about your conversation. I'd love to chat with you about our vision for the startup. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week, I think, once you understand the potential. You'll be as excited as we are. The heart emoji at the end felt like a mockery. Isabella had never sent me heart emojis before. In fact, Isabella had barely spoken to me beyond polite pleasantries at family dinners. But now that she wanted something, suddenly we were girlfriends. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to type back something cutting, something that would make clear exactly what I thought of their vision. But another part, the part that remembered Alexander as a gap-toothed 6-year-old bringing me dandelions, wanted to try one more time to make him understand. Instead, I typed, "We can talk." The response came immediately. Wonderful. How about Thursday at 2? There's a lovely cafe in town. Benson's Corner. I'll make a reservation. Can't wait. 2 heart emojis this time. The desperation was almost palpable. I set the phone aside and walked back to the kitchen window. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere in those shadows lay the ghost of the woman I used to be, the young mother who'd thought love and sacrifice were the same thing, who'd believed that giving everything to her children would somehow guarantee their respect and devotion. That woman had been wrong about a lot of things, but she'd been right about one thing this land was worth fighting for. Not because of its market value or development potential, but because it was mine. Because I'd earned it through years of scraped knees and sleepless nights, through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, through the kind of daily choices that build a life brick by brick. Alexander thought I was too old to understand dreams. What he didn't understand was that I was living mine had been living it for 25 years, and I had no intention of letting anyone, not even my own son, take it away from me. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that used to make me feel alive. Now, as I stood before my bedroom mirror adjusting the collar of my dark green blazer, it felt more like armor than clothing. I'd chosen my outfit carefully professional, but not desperate. Confident, but not confrontational. The kind of look that said I might be 62, but I wasn't anyone's fool. The drive to Benson's Corner took 15 minutes through countryside that had barely changed in 3 decades. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses like mine. Their owners mostly my age or older. All of us stubborn holdouts against the creeping development that had swallowed the eastern edge of the county. I wondered how many of them had children circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to cash in on their parents' life's work. Benson's Corner Cafe occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all white gingerbread trim and hanging flower baskets. I'd been here exactly once for my neighbor Grace's retirement party, and once when the ladies from church had organized a book club that lasted exactly 3 meetings. It wasn't my kind of place, all overpriced lattes and motivational quotes painted on reclaimed barnwood, but it was Isabella's kind of place, which should have been my first warning. I spotted her immediately through the front window, perfectly positioned at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Her blonde hair was pulled back in what she probably called a power bun, and she was wearing the kind of cream-colored blazer that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked up and waved, her smile bright enough to power the cafe's Edison bulb fixtures. The hostess, a girl young enough to be my granddaughter, led me through the maze of mismatched furniture to Isabella's table. The scent of cinnamon and expensive coffee couldn't quite mask the underlying smell of fresh paint and forced charm. Isabella stood and leaned in for an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. "You look wonderful. I love that blazer. It's so classic. Classic. The polite way of saying outdated. I'd bought this blazer for Jonathan's funeral 15 years ago, and it had served me well for every serious occasion since. But under Isabella's appraising gaze, it felt like a relic. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I have to admit, I'm curious about this conversation Alexander said we needed to have." Isabella's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, I thought it might be nice to talk without the men around. You know, sometimes they can be so intense about business." Our server appeared, another impossibly young girl with purple-streaked hair and a nose ring. Isabella ordered something called a vanilla bean oat milk macchiato with lavender foam. I asked for black coffee and watched the girl's face fall slightly, as if I'd personally disappointed her artistic coffee aspirations. "So," Isabella said, leaning forward with her hands clasped, "Alexander told me about your concerns regarding the startup. I completely understand your hesitation. It's a big decision. Is it? I kept my voice level. "Because from where I sit, there's no decision to make. The farm isn't for sale." Another flicker in that perfect smile. "Of course, and we respect that. But I thought maybe if you understood the full scope of our vision, you might see this differently. Not as selling the farm, but as transforming it into something bigger." The coffee arrived, along with Isabella's elaborate concoction topped with what looked like purple foam art. She photographed it with her phone before taking a sip, and I found myself wondering if anything in her life happened without being documented for social media. "Tell me about this vision," I said, though I already knew I wouldn't like what I heard. Isabella's eyes lit up. "It's so exciting. Evelyn, we're developing an app called Heartland Fresh. It connects urban consumers directly with local food producers. Think of it as the Uber of sustainable agriculture." The Uber of sustainable agriculture. I sipped my coffee and tried not to let my expression give away my thoughts. "The beauty of it," Isabella continued, "is that we're not just building an app. We're creating a lifestyle brand. And your farm would be our flagship property, the face of authentic American farming. We'd build a state-of-the-art facility for food processing and distribution. Maybe add a farm-to-table restaurant. Possibly even a boutique hotel for agritourism." I set down my cup. "On my 40 acres. Well, yes, we'd need to purchase the property to make the improvements, but you'd be a stakeholder in the company, a founding partner. Really. Your name would be on everything Evelyn's Farm Fresh or something equally authentic." Authentic. There was that word again, weaponized by people who wouldn't know authentic if it bit them on their designer jeans. "And what would happen to my house?" I asked. "Oh, we'd absolutely preserve the farmhouse. It has such character. We might need to make some updates, you know. Open up some walls, add some contemporary touches, but the bones are gorgeous. It would make a perfect visitor center or maybe a charming cafe space. A visitor center, my kitchen, where I'd fed my boys for 20 years, turned into a place for strangers to buy overpriced coffee and take selfies." "Isabella," I said carefully, "what you're describing isn't transforming my farm. It's erasing it." Her face fell into an expression of practiced concern. "I understand why it might feel that way, but think about the legacy aspect. Instead of just leaving Alexander and Nathan a piece of land, you'd be leaving them a thriving business, a real inheritance." Nathan. She'd mentioned Nathan, which surprised me. In the 2 years she'd been part of our family, Isabella had barely acknowledged my older son's existence, especially after she'd learned he was adopted. "Has Nathan expressed interest in this venture?" I asked. "Well, he's been so busy with his legal work in Europe, but I'm sure once he understands the opportunity." She waved her hand vaguely. The important thing is that you'd be securing both boys' futures. Both boys, as if she gave a damn about Nathan's future. How much money are we talking about? I asked bluntly. Isabella nearly choked on her lavender foam. I'm sorry. You want me to sell my farm to fund your startup. How much are you asking for? She recovered quickly, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what looked like a detailed presentation. Well, we've had this property appraised at $1.2 million, which honestly seems conservative given the development potential. But we're only asking for $800,000 in startup funding. The rest would remain as your equity stake in the company. $800,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. And if your app fails, I asked. It won't. The response was immediate and defensive. We have a solid business plan, proven market research, and several potential investors already interested. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. Evelyn, this is the future of food distribution. I thought about Alexander's previous business ventures. The organic dog treat company that folded after 6 months. The subscription box service for artisanal beard oils that never made it past the concept stage. The food truck that had been repossessed before he'd made a single sale. Isabella, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care. I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to me, but my answer is still no. Her composure cracked like ice in spring. Evelyn, please just think about it for a few more days. Talk to your financial advisor. Maybe get a second opinion on the property value. I really think you're not seeing the full picture here. I see the picture just fine. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. And I see that you and Alexander have already spent a lot of time planning what to do with my property without actually asking if I wanted to sell it. That's not we would never... Isabella scrambled to her feet, her carefully constructed facade finally falling away. Evelyn, Alexander is your son. He deserves better than to watch his dreams die because you're too sentimental about an old house. There it was, the real Isabella, stripped of her heart emojis and fake friendship. The woman who thought my life's work was just sentiment standing in the way of her ambitions. You're right, I said quietly. Alexander is my son, which is exactly why I know the difference between supporting his dreams and enabling his delusions. I left her standing there in the cafe, her purple foam going flat in the afternoon light. The drive home felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting behind the maple trees Jonathan had planted the year Nathan started kindergarten. Inside, the house felt different, somehow smaller, more fragile. I walked through the rooms, seeing them through Isabella's eyes, the outdated wallpaper in the dining room, the scuffed hardwood floors, the kitchen cabinets I'd painted myself, but hadn't updated in a decade. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of every repair I'd deferred, every modern convenience I'd done without. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. How did it go with Isabella? She said you seemed upset. Upset, as if I were an old woman having an emotional moment instead of a property owner who'd just been pitched on destroying everything she'd built. I started to type a response, then deleted it, then started again and deleted that too. What was there to say that his wife had just described turning my home into a tourist attraction? That they'd already had my property appraised without my knowledge, that they saw my 40 acres not as my legacy, but as their lottery ticket. Instead, I set the phone aside and poured myself a glass of Jonathan's whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty now. I'd been saving it for special occasions that never seemed special enough, but tonight felt like the right time to finish it. The whiskey burned going down, a familiar fire that reminded me of winter evenings when Jonathan and I would sit by the fireplace, planning improvements to the farm and dreaming about the boys' futures. He'd had such hopes for them both, such faith that love and good values would be enough to guide them through life. He'd have been heartbroken to see what Alexander had become, but he'd have been proud of what Nathan was building for himself in Europe, making his own way without asking for handouts or expecting the world to owe him anything. As I sat in the growing darkness, I realized something had shifted inside me during that conversation with Isabella. The last vestiges of my maternal guilt, the voice that whispered I should sacrifice anything for my children's happiness, had finally gone quiet. Alexander thought I was too old to understand dreams. Isabella thought I was too sentimental to make smart business decisions. They were both wrong, but their mistake would be my advantage because I was about to show them exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I called my neighbor, Grace Wilson. At 70, she'd been my closest friend since I moved to the farm as a young bride. She'd helped me through Jonathan's death, offered advice when the boys were teenagers, and always told me the truth whether I wanted to hear it or not. They did what? Grace's voice crackled with indignation when I told her about Isabella's proposal. They want to turn the farm into some kind of hipster food destination, I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. Complete with a visitor center where my house is now. And they already had it appraised without telling you. Apparently, Grace made a sound that was half laugh, half snort. The nerve of those two. You know what this reminds me of, that case on the news last month? The one about elderly financial abuse. I'm not elderly, I protested automatically. Of course not, honey. But that's how they're treating you, like you're some doddering old lady who can't make decisions for herself. I could hear her moving around her kitchen as she spoke. You know what you need to do? Talk to William Jenkins. Will Jenkins was our local financial advisor. He'd helped Jonathan and me set up our retirement accounts years ago and had become something of a family friend. I'm not sure what Will could do, I said. He can tell you exactly what that land is worth, for one thing, and he can help you figure out if there's any merit to this app idea, because between you and me, it sounds like another one of Alexander's half-baked schemes. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I hadn't checked my email in days, and there were several messages from Alexander. The most recent had the subject line, Heartland Fresh Business Plan, and included several attachments. I opened them one by one, my stomach tightening as I scrolled through detailed architectural renderings of my farm transformed beyond recognition. Modern glass buildings where the old barn stood. A parking lot covering what used to be my vegetable garden. My farmhouse. My home remodeled into something that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine. Not on a working farm. The date on the files showed they'd been created 3 months ago. 3 months of planning, designing, calculating, all without a single word to me about whether I'd be willing to sell. There was another file, labeled Property Assessment, which confirmed what Isabella had told me. The land was valued at $1.2 million with development potential. The assessment had been completed by a real estate firm I'd never heard of, based in the city where Alexander and Isabella lived, 60 miles away. My hands were trembling as I closed the laptop. This wasn't just presumptuous, it was a betrayal. They hadn't just been dreaming about what they could do with my farm. They'd been actively planning to take it from me. I picked up the phone and called Will Jenkins. Will Jenkins agreed to meet me for lunch the next day at the diner in town, a far cry from Benson's Corner, with its plain counter, vinyl booths, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since sunrise. It was the kind of place where farmers gathered after morning chores, where the waitress knew your order before you sat down, where nobody took pictures of their food. Will was already in a corner booth when I arrived, his gray hair freshly cut, and his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a menu he must have memorized years ago. He stood when he saw me, offering a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Evelyn, good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for meeting me on such short notice. Anything for Jonathan's widow." He closed his menu. "Now tell me what's going on with Alexander and this startup of his." Over plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, I explained everything: the phone call, the meeting with Isabella, the architectural plans I'd discovered. Will listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, he pushed his plate aside and folded his hands on the table. "First things first. Evelyn, your farm is worth whatever someone's willing to pay for it, but $1.2 million sounds about right in the current market. Maybe a bit more given the location and road frontage." "So they're not trying to cheat me on the value," I said. "Not on the land value, no. But this business plan?" He shook his head. "I'd need to see the full proposal, but from what you're describing, it sounds ambitious, maybe too ambitious. What do you mean the farm-to-table market is already saturated?" "There are dozens of apps connecting consumers with local farmers. and building a processing facility. Restaurant and hotel, that's millions in startup costs. Not just the $800,000 they're asking from you. I pushed a potato around my plate. So you think it will fail? I didn't say that. Will took off his glasses and polished them with his napkin. It could work with the right management and sufficient capital. The question is whether Alexander and Isabella have either of those things. They don't, I said flatly. Alexander has never run a successful business, and Isabella's MBA doesn't make up for their lack of experience in agriculture or hospitality. Will nodded slowly. Then I think you know what you need to do. He hesitated, then added, but there's something else we should discuss. Evelyn, your own financial situation. I tensed. What about it? You're in good shape. The farm is paid off. You have your pension from the school district and the lease income from the fields. But have you thought about long-term care medical expenses as you age? The farm isn't a liquid asset. The questions stung more than I wanted to admit. They were the same concerns Alexander had raised, albeit more tactfully presented. I'm not planning on getting sick or infirm anytime soon, I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. Will's expression softened. Nobody plans for it, Evelyn, but it happens, and when it does, having options matters. He reached across the table and patted my hand. I'm not saying you should sell to Alexander, far from it, but I am saying you should think about your own future as much as you're thinking about his. The drive home gave me too much time to think. Will's words echoed in my mind, mixing uncomfortably with Alexander's accusation that I was living in the past. Was my determination to keep the farm just sentimentality? As Isabella had suggested, I pulled over at the overlook near the top of Miller's Ridge, a spot Jonathan and I used to visit when we needed perspective. From here, I could see most of the valley, including my farm in the distance, a patchwork of fields and woodlots with the red roof of the farmhouse just visible among the trees. Jonathan and I had stood in this exact spot 27 years ago, the day we closed on the property. This is where we'll build our life, he'd said, his arm around my shoulders. This is where we'll grow old together. Except he hadn't grown old at all. A rainy night, a drunk driver, and suddenly I was a widow at 47 with 2 teenage boys to raise and a farm to manage. I'd considered selling then. The insurance money would have been enough for a modest house in town, with some left over for the boys' college funds. But Nathan and Alexander had begged me to keep the farm. It was home. They'd said. It was where their memories of their father lived, so I'd kept it. I'd learned to fix fences and drive the tractor. I'd taken a job teaching at the elementary school to supplement our income. I'd built a life brick by brick, day by day, season by season. And now Alexander wanted to tear it all down for an app that connected people who would never know the feel of soil between their fingers with food they'd never seen growing. The irony was almost too much to bear. When I got home, there was a sleek black car in my driveway, Alexander and Isabella. My stomach clenched as I parked beside them. They were waiting on the porch, Alexander pacing while Isabella sat primly on the swing Jonathan had hung the summer before he died. They both looked up as I approached, their expressions a carefully composed mixture of concern and determination. "Mom," Alexander stepped forward. "We need to talk." I unlocked the door without answering, letting them follow me into the house. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, a small ritual that gave me time to compose myself. "If this is about Heartland Fresh, my answer hasn't changed," I said, taking mugs from the cabinet. "Actually," Isabella said, her voice softer than usual, "we've been thinking about your concerns, and we've come up with an alternative approach that might address them." I turned to face them, leaning against the counter. "I'm listening." Alexander and Isabella exchanged a glance before he continued. "What if, instead of selling the entire property, you kept the house and, say, 5 acres around it? We could develop just the back portion for the processing facility." My eyebrows rose. This was unexpected. "Go on. You'd still own your home," Isabella added quickly. "You wouldn't have to move or change anything about your daily life, and we'd structure the deal as a partnership rather than a straight sale." "What kind of partnership?" I asked. As the kettle began to whistle, Alexander sat at the kitchen table, his expression earnest in a way that reminded me painfully of Jonathan. "You'd retain ownership of the house and immediate grounds. We'd purchase the back acreage for the facility, and you'd have a 20% stake in the business itself, with guaranteed income regardless of performance. I poured hot water over tea bags, considering their words. The proposal was better than I'd expected, more respectful of my attachment to the house. At least, but something felt off. Why the change of heart? I asked, setting mugs in front of them. Isabella wrapped her manicured hands around her mug. We realized we were thinking too much about the business and not enough about family. This farm is your home. Evelyn, we don't want to take that from you. Her words were perfect, too perfect, like she'd rehearsed them in the car on the way over. And there was something in Alexander's eyes, a flicker of calculation that reminded me of when he was a teenager trying to talk his way out of trouble. That's very considerate, I said carefully. I'd need to see the details in writing, of course, and I'd want my own lawyer to review any agreement. Absolutely, Alexander nodded vigorously. We can have our attorney draft something for review. Their attorney, not a neutral party. I'd prefer to use my own attorney to draft any agreements, I countered. Oh, Alexander looked momentarily thrown. Sure, if that's what you want. It might take longer. Though, and we're trying to move quickly, the permit applications need to be filed by the end of the month if we want to break ground in spring. Spring construction. They were already planning the timeline. I'd still like to understand more about the business itself, I said. The app, the facility, all of it. If I'm going to be a partner, I should know what I'm investing in. Isabella brightened, reaching for her ever-present phone. I have our full presentation right here. I can walk you through it. For the next hour, I listened as Isabella detailed their vision for Heartland Fresh. The app would connect urban consumers with local farmers, allowing them to order fresh produce, meat, and dairy for home delivery. The processing facility on my property would serve as the central hub, where products would be sorted, packaged, and shipped. It sounded plausible enough, but there were gaps in the planned logistical challenges they glossed over, competitive advantages they couldn't clearly articulate, revenue projections that seemed wildly optimistic. And you've already secured other investors? I asked. We have several interested parties, Alexander said vaguely. But your participation is key. Mom, having the farm as our flagship property gives us credibility that money can't buy. Credibility. That was what they wanted from me, not just my land or my money. They wanted to use my life's work to lend authenticity to their venture. I need time to think about this, I said finally, and to consult with my financial advisor. Alexander's face fell slightly. Of course, but like I said, we're on a tight timeline with the permits. I understand, I said, rising to indicate the meeting was over. I'll have an answer for you by next week. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, turning my empty mug in my hands. Their revised offer was better. Certainly. I could keep my home, have guaranteed income, possibly even see the farm become part of something successful. But the timing bothered me. The rush to file permits, the vague references to other investors, the carefully rehearsed explanations. It all felt like pressure tactics, like they were trying to hustle me into a decision before I could fully consider the implications. I picked up the phone and dialed Nathan's number in Prague. It would be late there, but I needed to hear his voice, needed his steady perspective. The international connection crackled as it rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Mom, is everything okay? I'm sorry to wake you. Honey, I said, suddenly feeling guilty. I just needed to talk. What's wrong? He sounded more alert now, concerned. It's Alexander and Isabella. They want to buy the farm or most of it for some startup they're planning. There was a long pause. They want to buy the farm, he repeated slowly, for a startup. An app called Heartland Fresh, connecting urban consumers with local food producers. Another pause. And what do you want to do? The question was so simple, so direct, so Nathan. Not what I should do, or what made financial sense, but what I wanted. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should consider it. They've offered to let me keep the house and some land around it. I'd have income from the business. And maybe it's time to think about the future. Mom! Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. Whose future are we talking about? Yours or theirs? The question hit me like a splash of cold water. I'm not sure anymore. Look, I can't tell you what to do, Nathan said. But I know that farm is more than just property to you. Nathan continued, his voice carrying across the ocean between us. It's Dad's legacy. It's our childhood. It's the life you built. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Yes. So the real question is whether you're ready to let that go. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the darkened house, running my fingers along the walls Jonathan and I had painted together, the banister he'd carved by hand, the window frames we'd replaced that first summer. Every inch of this place held our shared history. Near dawn, I finally dozed off in Jonathan's old armchair, only to be awakened a few hours later by my phone. Alexander again. Mom, Isabella and I have been thinking more about our proposal, he said without preamble. We want to show you we're serious about addressing your concerns. I'm listening, I said, voice still rough with sleep. We'd like to come by this afternoon with some updated plans, just to talk. No pressure. I glanced at the clock, 9:17 a.m. What time? How about 2? We'll bring lunch, I agreed, though my stomach tightened at the thought of another sales pitch. After hanging up, I called Grace. They're coming back already, she asked, sounding as suspicious as I felt. That was fast? Too fast, I agreed. They're bringing updated plans. You want me to come over, provide some moral support? The offer was tempting, but I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. No, I need to handle this myself, but maybe be ready for a phone call afterward. I'll keep my cell on, and Evelyn, don't sign anything. Not a damn thing. I spent the morning cleaning not for Alexander and Isabella's benefit, but because the physical activity helped clear my mind. By the time their sleek black car pulled into my driveway, I'd scrubbed the kitchen floor, dusted the living room, and mentally prepared myself for whatever they were planning. They arrived with takeout bags from an expensive sandwich place in the city and smiles that seemed more genuine than last time. Alexander gave me a real hug instead of the perfunctory greeting he'd offered recently, and Isabella had toned down her usual polish, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger and more approachable. The place looks great, Mom, Alexander said, glancing around as if seeing the farmhouse with new eyes. Did you repaint the hallway? 3 years ago, I replied, watching his face fall slightly at the reminder of how infrequently he visited. We settled in the kitchen, where Isabella laid out containers of food with casual grace. I got your favorite turkey club, she said to me. Alexander mentioned you always ordered it at Martin's Deli. I hadn't been to Martin's in years, not since it changed ownership and doubled its prices, but I appreciated the gesture. Thank you. Once we were seated, Alexander pulled out a sleek folder. So, we've been thinking a lot about your connection to the house and the land, he began, and we realized our original proposal didn't respect that enough. That's right, Isabella chimed in, touching Alexander's arm in a gesture that seemed carefully choreographed. This is your home. We want to honor that. Twist number 2, Alexander opened the folder to reveal new architectural renderings, but these were dramatically different from the ones I'd seen before. Instead of completely transforming the property, these plans showed a more modest development focused on the back 20 acres, leaving the farmhouse and surrounding area intact. We're proposing a split approach, Alexander explained, his voice taking on the excited tone I remembered from his childhood science fair projects. You keep the house and the front fields about half the property. We develop just the back portion for the processing facility and a small demonstration garden. I studied the drawings carefully. They did seem more respectful of the existing landscape, with the new buildings tucked behind the tree line where they wouldn't be visible from the house. And the business arrangement, I asked. Isabella took over, her MBA training evident in her precise explanation. You'd retain full ownership of the house and front acreage. We'd purchase the back portion at market value, about $600,000 based on the reduced acreage. And you'd have a 25% stake in Heartland Fresh itself, with guaranteed quarterly dividends regardless of profitability for the first 5 years, It was, objectively, a better offer than before. More money for less land, a higher stake in the business, guaranteed income. Why the change, I asked, watching their faces carefully. Alexander's expression softened in a way that reminded me painfully of Jonathan. Because you were right, Mom. This isn't just an investment property. It's our family home. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. Dad built this place for us. I don't want to erase that. I want to build on it. His words struck a chord I hadn't expected. For a moment, I saw the little boy who'd followed Jonathan everywhere, asking endless questions about how things worked, why the sky was blue, what made the crops grow. I appreciate that. Alexander, I said, squeezing his hand before withdrawing mine. It's a more thoughtful approach. Isabella smiled, clearly sensing a shift in my position. We really want you to be part of this. Evelyn, your knowledge, your connection to the land, it's invaluable. This wouldn't just be our project. It would be your legacy, too. Legacy. The word hung in the air between us. Jonathan's legacy. My legacy. A way to preserve what we'd built while allowing it to evolve. I need to think about it, I said finally. And I'd still want my own attorney to review everything. Of course. Alexander nodded eagerly. Take all the time you need. But then he hesitated, exchanging a glance with Isabella. Well, not all the time. We do need to file those permit applications soon. And, well, there's something else. Isabella placed her hand on her stomach in a gesture that couldn't be misinterpreted. We're pregnant. Evelyn. Due in July. The news hit me like a physical blow. A grandchild. Another generation of Hartmans. That's... Congratulations, I managed, as a rush of conflicting emotions washed over me. We want to build something for the baby's future, Alexander said, his voice soft. Something meaningful. A family business with real values, not just another corporate job. I looked at Isabella with new eyes, seeing beyond the polished exterior to the expectant mother beneath. For the first time, I glimpsed something genuine in her, a vulnerability and hope that resonated with my own memories of impending motherhood. I'll have an answer for you by the end of the week, I promised, after they left. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, turning over their proposal in my mind. It was reasonable. More than reasonable. It addressed my main concerns while offering financial security. And now there was a grandchild to consider, a new branch of the family tree that Jonathan would have been overjoyed to welcome. Maybe it was time to let go. Not of everything, but of the idea that keeping things exactly as they had been was the only way to honor the past. I picked up the phone to call Nathan, then set it down again. It was the middle of the night in Prague. And besides, I needed to work this out for myself. Instead, I drove into town to see Will Jenkins. His office was above the hardware store, a small but tidy space with windows overlooking Main Street. He listened as I outlined Alexander and Isabella's new proposal, nodding occasionally and taking notes. It's certainly more favorable, he said when I finished. And the guaranteed income would provide you with security. But, I prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. Will removed his glasses, polishing them with his handkerchief. But I'm concerned about the rush. Why the hurry to file permits, and why the sudden change in approach? It feels calculated. His words echoed my own unease. They just told me they're expecting a baby. That might explain the urgency. Perhaps. Will replaced his glasses. Still, I'd advise caution. Let me look over the actual agreement before you commit to anything. As I drove home, heavy clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first real storm of autumn. The changing weather matched my mood unsettled, with darkness gathering at the edges. Alexander called that evening, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. Mom, great news. One of our potential investors just confirmed they're in contingent on us securing the property. Of course, this is really happening. That's wonderful, I said, trying to match his enthusiasm. Who's the investor? A venture capital firm from Chicago. They love the farm-to-table concept and our sustainability angle. He paused. Have you thought any more about our offer? I'm considering it. I told you I'd have an answer by the end of the week. Right, of course. Another pause. It's just that their commitment is time-sensitive. If we don't move forward soon, they might back out. There it was again, the pressure, the artificial urgency. A knot formed in my stomach. Alexander, I need time to think. This is a major decision. I know. Mom, I'm not trying to rush you. But his tone said otherwise. Just, the sooner you can let us know, the better. After we hung up, I sat on the porch watching the approaching storm. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the fields where Jonathan and I had once planted corn together, where the boys had played catch on summer evenings, where I'd walked countless times in solitude after becoming a widow. Half of it would be gone, transformed into a food processing facility. Even with the improved offer, that reality hadn't changed. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as I went inside, closing the door on the gathering storm. The storm raged through the night, wind howling around the eaves of the old farmhouse. I lay awake listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the structure weathering yet another tempest, just as it had for decades before I came and would continue to do long after I was gone. Morning brought clear skies, but fresh damage. A large oak branch had crashed onto the corner of the barn roof, punching a hole in the aging shingles. As I stood in the muddy yard assessing the damage, my phone rang. Alexander again. Mom, Isabella and I were thinking we should get the paperwork started on our agreement. Our attorney can draft something today if you're ready. I stared at the damaged barn. Alexander, there's a hole in the barn roof from the storm. I've got more pressing concerns right now. Oh! He sounded genuinely surprised, as if the weather wouldn't affect the farm. That's terrible. Is it bad? Bad enough that I need to get it patched before the next rain. I could come help, he offered, though without much conviction. Don't worry about it. I've handled worse. I hesitated, then added, about the agreement, I'd still prefer to have my own attorney draw up the paperwork. Sure, but that could take weeks. Our lawyer already knows what we want to include. It would just be a preliminary agreement to get things moving. The pressure again. Always the pressure. I need to deal with this roof, I said firmly. We can talk about paperwork later. I spent the morning on the phone with my insurance company and a local contractor, then changed into work clothes and climbed a ladder to tarp over the damage until repairs could be made. By afternoon, my back ached and my hands were scraped from handling splintered wood, but the barn was temporarily weatherproofed. I was making tea when another car pulled into the driveway, not Alexander's sleek sedan, but a more modest compact. A man in a suit emerged, carrying a briefcase. I didn't recognize him. When I opened the door, he offered his hand with a practiced smile. Mrs. Hartman Marcus Reynolds. I'm the attorney representing your son and daughter-in-law in the Heartland Fresh venture. I hope I'm not intruding. I hadn't invited him, hadn't been told he was coming, yet here he stood on my porch as if this were a scheduled appointment. Mr. Reynolds, I said, not inviting him in. I wasn't expecting you. His smile didn't waver. Alexander mentioned you had some concerns about the agreement. I thought it might be helpful if I walked you through the paperwork personally, answered any questions. I hesitated, torn between sending him away and hearing what he had to say. Curiosity won. Come in. I was just making tea. In the kitchen, Reynolds laid out several documents on the table while I poured tea. He was smooth and articulate, explaining complex legal concepts in simplified terms that managed to sound both helpful and slightly condescending. This is a standard property transfer agreement, he said, pointing to the first document. It covers the sale of the back 20 acres while preserving your full rights to the house and front portion. I scanned the document, noting the purchase price of $600,000 in line with what Alexander had proposed. And this, Reynolds continued, turning to a thicker document, outlines your partnership stake in Heartland Fresh itself, 25% ownership, quarterly dividend payments, and a seat on the advisory board. It all seemed straightforward enough, but I'd learned long ago to read the fine print. I'd like time to review these, I said. Of course, Reynolds smiled again. Though Alexander mentioned you're hoping to move quickly, given their investor situation, I hadn't said any such thing, but I let it pass. What's this section here? I asked, pointing to a paragraph buried in the middle of the partnership agreement. Ah, Just standard language about future development rights, Reynolds said casually. Nothing to worry about. Twist number 3, I read the clause more carefully, and my blood ran cold. Hidden in the legal jargon was a provision granting Alexander and Isabella first right of refusal on the remaining property, my house and the front acreage, at a predetermined price, significantly below market value. If the business succeeded and I later decided to sell, they could purchase my home for a fraction of its worth. If I died, they would have the same option before Nathan could inherit. This isn't just about the back 20 acres, is it? I said quietly, looking up at Reynolds. This is about the entire farm. His expression remained neutral, professional. It's a contingency clause, Mrs. Hartman. Quite standard in these arrangements. It simply ensures that if you ever decide to sell the rest of the property, Heartland Fresh would have the opportunity to keep it intact. At a price set today, regardless of future value. Well, yes, that provides certainty for all parties. All parties except me and my elder son, I said, feeling a surge of anger. Did Alexander explain this provision to you specifically? Reynolds hesitated just for a moment, but long enough to confirm my suspicions. We discussed the general parameters of the agreement. I closed the folder, sliding it back across the table. Mr. Reynolds, I think we're done here. I'll have my own attorney contact you if I decide to move forward. His smile finally faltered. Mrs. Hartman, I understand your caution, but Alexander and Isabella are facing some time constraints with their investors. If we could at least sign a letter of intent today. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. No signatures today. Reynolds gathered his papers with practiced efficiency. I understand, but please do consider the opportunity carefully. Alexander and Isabella have put their hearts into this project. After he left, I called Alexander immediately, my hands shaking with anger. You sent your lawyer to my house, I demanded when he answered. Mom, Without warning me, without asking if it was convenient. Marcus was in the area. I thought it would save time. And that clause about future purchase rights, were you going to mention that little detail, or just hope I wouldn't notice? A pause. It's a standard provision, he said finally, echoing Reynolds' words. It just ensures the property stays with the business if anything happens. If anything happens, I repeated. You mean if I die? Mom, that's not... Don't lie to me, Alexander. This was never about preserving my connection to the house. This was about getting control of the entire farm, one piece at a time. That's not fair. We offered you a genuine partnership. The future purchase option is just protection for our investment. Protection that cuts Nathan out entirely, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. He'd have no say in what happens to his childhood home. Alexander's silence told me everything I needed to know. I think you should go, I said quietly. Mom, I need time to think. Real time. Not the rushed timeline you keep trying to impose. Don't call me. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. The deception cut deep, not just the hidden clause, but the calculated way they'd presented their revised offer, making it seem like they were accommodating my concerns while actually maneuvering for even greater control. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, signaling another approaching storm. I grabbed a raincoat and went to check on my hasty repair job on the barn roof. The wind was already picking up, tugging at the tarp I'd secured that morning. As I stood there, rain beginning to spatter around me, I realized how vulnerable the old farm truly was, not just to storms, but to time, to change, to the calculating ambitions of my own son. I needed help. Real help, not the condescending guidance of Marcus Reynolds or the self-interested advice of Alexander and Isabella. I needed Nathan. That night, the second storm hit harder than the first. Wind shrieked around the farmhouse, rain lashed the windows, and sometime past midnight, a thunderous crack announced the oak tree by the driveway had finally succumbed to age and weather. I stood at the window watching it fall in the flashes of lightning, a slow-motion collapse of something I'd thought eternal. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. By morning, the tree lay across my driveway, its massive trunk blocking access to the road. I was effectively trapped on the farm until it could be cleared. I called the local tree service, only to be told they were backed up with emergency calls and couldn't get to me until tomorrow at the earliest. Then I tried Alexander, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message explaining the situation, asking if he could help or send someone. Hours passed with no response. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and tried Alexander again. Still no answer. At noon, my phone finally rang, not Alexander, but Isabella. "Evelyn, I just got your message to Alex," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm so sorry about the tree." "Where's Alexander?" I asked. "He's in Chicago, meeting with the investors. He flew out last night ahead of the storm." A pause. "We would help if we could, but we're both tied up with these meetings. They're really critical for the business." The business that didn't exist yet was more important than helping me clear a fallen tree. I swallowed my disappointment. "I understand. The tree service will be here tomorrow." "Perfect," Isabella said, sounding relieved. "And Evelyn, about yesterday with Marcus, Alex feels terrible about how that went. We never meant to pressure you." "But you did," I said flatly. "And that clause about future purchase rights was deliberately hidden." "Not hidden," she protested. "It's standard language in these agreements. Marcus should have explained it better." I was tired of the excuses, the rationalizations. "Isabella, I need to go. I have a tree to deal with." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, feeling more alone than I had in years. Alexander was too busy with his meetings to help his mother clear a tree from her driveway, too focused on his business dreams to see or care that he was trying to steal my dream from me. Twist number 4, I called Nathan, not caring that it was the middle of the night in Prague. This time, he answered on the first ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" I told him everything: the revised offer, the hidden clause, the fallen tree, Alexander's absence. "That's not the worst of it," Nathan said when I'd finished. His voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Alex called me last week." My heart sank. What did he want? He asked me to sign a waiver of inheritance rights to the farm. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that for a moment I couldn't speak. "He said it was just a formality," Nathan continued, "that you were planning to sell most of the property to fund their startup, and the paperwork would be cleaner if I relinquished any claim." "And what did you say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nathan had always been the peacemaker. "I told him I needed to speak with you first, that I wouldn't sign anything without understanding your wishes." He paused. He didn't like that answer. Of course he hadn't. Alexander had been trying to work both ends, securing my property while cutting Nathan out of any future claim. The realization made me physically ill. "Nathan, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. This isn't your fault." Another pause. "Mom, I think I should come home." The offer brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "You can't just leave your job." "Actually, I have vacation time saved up. And this sounds like an emergency." "Tree aside," his voice softened. "You shouldn't be dealing with this alone." "When could you come?" I asked, hope rising despite my determination to handle things myself. "I'll check flights today. I could probably be there by the weekend." The relief I felt was overwhelming. "Thank you, Nathan. It's what family does. Mom. Real family." After we hung up, I went outside to assess the fallen oak. It was even more massive up close. Its trunk nearly 3 feet in diameter, its sprawling branches creating a tangled barrier across the entire width of the driveway. I couldn't clear it alone, not completely, but I could make a start. I fetched the chainsaw from the shed, checking the fuel and oil levels before pulling the starter cord. It roared to life on the 3rd try, the familiar vibration traveling up my arms as I approached the outer branches. I worked steadily through the afternoon, cutting away the smaller limbs and dragging them to the side of the driveway. The physical labor was exhausting, but oddly satisfying, a problem I could solve with my own hands, unlike the tangled mess Alexander had created. By sunset, I'd cleared enough of the smaller branches to reveal the true challenge: the massive trunk that still blocked my exit. That would require professional equipment and stronger backs than mine. As I put away the chainsaw, my phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Sorry about the tree. Stuck in Chicago. We'll call tomorrow. No offer to come home early. No genuine concern." Just a perfunctory acknowledgement and postponement. I didn't respond. Inside, I showered away the sweat and sawdust, then made a simple dinner. As I ate, I realized something had shifted inside me during those hours of physical labor. The betrayal still hurt, perhaps would always hurt, but the uncertainty had vanished. I would not sell my farm to fund Alexander's startup. Not the back 20 acres, not a single square foot. The farm would remain intact, as Jonathan and I had always intended. And if that meant Alexander's dreams of Heartland Fresh would die, so be it. He'd find another dream, another scheme. He always did. The question now was how to proceed. Alexander and Isabella wouldn't give up easily, not with investors in the wings, permits ready to file, and a baby on the way. They would push harder, perhaps even resort to legal action if they thought they could win. I needed to be prepared. I spent the evening researching online, learning about property rights, business partnerships, and ways to protect assets from family disputes. The information was overwhelming, but one thing became clear: I needed professional help. Tomorrow, I would call a real estate attorney in the city, someone with no connection to Alexander or Isabella, someone who would represent my interests alone. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for the son who valued my property more than my wishes, for the relationship that might never recover from this betrayal, for the family unity that Jonathan had treasured above all else. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars emerging in the wake of the storm. I stood on the porch looking up at them, remembering how Jonathan and I used to do this together, his arm around my shoulders, his voice pointing out constellations I could never quite identify on my own. "I'm trying to do right by both of them," I whispered to the stars, to Jonathan's memory. "But I don't know if I can anymore." The only answer was the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl hunting in the fields. Morning brought a call from the tree service. They were still backed up, but might be able to get to me by late afternoon. I resigned myself to another day trapped on the farm, using the time to compile documents I'd need for my meeting with the attorney. As I sorted through papers in Jonathan's old office, I found a folder I hadn't opened in years, labeled simply Boys College. Inside were the financial records of Alexander's education tuition payments, book stipends, rent checks for his off-campus apartment. The total was staggering, especially compared to Nathan's more modest expenses. Alexander had attended an expensive private university, changed majors 3 times, and taken 5 years to graduate. Jonathan and I had covered every cost without complaint. Believing education was the best investment we could make in our children's futures, I found another folder behind it, Alexander Business Loans. This one contained promissory notes for the money we'd advanced for his previous ventures. The organic dog treat company, $15,000. The beard oil subscription service, $22,000. The food truck, $35,000. None of the loans had been repaid. Some had been explicitly forgiven in moments of maternal weakness. Others had simply been forgotten by Alexander, not by me. Climax number 2. My phone rang just as I was calculating the total $73,000 in business loans alone, not counting college expenses. "Hello, Mom." Alexander's voice was unusually subdued. "I just wanted to check on you. How's the tree situation? The service is coming this afternoon, hopefully." Good. He paused. "Listen, about the other day with Marcus and that clause, I should have been more transparent. I'm sorry." The apology sounded rehearsed, as if Isabella had coached him on what to say. "Did you ask Nathan to waive his inheritance rights?" I asked bluntly. Another pause, longer this time. "I mentioned it to him, yes, as a way to streamline the paperwork, without discussing it with me first. Mom, it was just a preliminary conversation. Nothing formal." I looked down at the folder of unpaid loans in my lap. "Alexander, I've been going through some old financial records. Do you remember how much your father and I lent you for your various business ventures?" The silence on the other end was telling. "Over $70,000, I continued, none of which has been repaid." "Those were investments," he said defensively. "You and Dad wanted to support my entrepreneurial spirit." "They were loans, Alexander. And now you want another $600,000 for Heartland Fresh, plus control over the rest of the property in the future." It's different this time. Isabella and I have real investors, a solid business plan. It's not different. It's the same pattern, just with higher stakes. I took a deep breath. I've made a decision. I'm not selling any portion of the farm. Not now. Not ever. Mom, you can't. I can, and I am. My voice was steady, certain. This farm stays intact, as your father and I always intended. This is because of Nathan, isn't it? Alexander's voice hardened. He's poisoned you against me, against our business. This has nothing to do with Nathan and everything to do with your actions. Sending a lawyer to pressure me, hiding clauses in contracts, trying to cut your brother out of his inheritance. He's not even your real son, Alexander shouted, then immediately fell silent, as if shocked by his own words. The old hurt flared not for me, but for Nathan. After all these years, Alexander still used adoption as a weapon. Nathan is every bit my son, I said quietly. And right now, he's acting more like family than you are. Mom, I didn't mean. I think we're done talking for now. Alexander, the tree service will be here soon. Wait, please. His voice had an edge of desperation now. The investors are ready to commit. We've already started the permit paperwork. We need an answer now. You have your answer. It's no? You're making a huge mistake, he said, anger replacing the desperation. This could have secured your future. Our family's future. My future is secure. I have everything I need right here. After I hung up, I sat motionless, the folder still open in my lap. The confrontation had been inevitable, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I'd raised Alexander, loved him, supported him financially and emotionally through every phase of his life. And still, he was willing to manipulate and deceive me to get what he wanted. The sound of a vehicle in the driveway roused me from my thoughts. Not the tree service, but a taxi, and emerging from it, looking travel-worn but determined, was Nathan. I hurried to the door, disbelief and joy mingling as I watched my elder son pay the driver and retrieve a suitcase from the trunk. Nathan, I called, stepping onto the porch. How did you get past the tree? He grinned, the familiar expression lighting up his serious face. I had the taxi drop me at the road and walked the rest of the way, climbed over that oak like I used to climb trees as a kid. He bounded up the porch steps and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of airplane and cologne. Hi, Mom. You said the weekend, I murmured into his shoulder. I got an earlier flight. Seemed like you could use reinforcements sooner rather than later. As we walked inside, the tree service finally arrived. Chainsaws and equipment ready to clear my driveway. Nathan insisted on helping them, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt and pitching in despite my protests that he must be exhausted from his journey. I watched from the porch as my adopted son, my son, no qualifiers needed, worked alongside the professionals to clear away the fallen oak that had symbolized my imprisonment. With each branch they removed, each section of trunk they cut away. I felt lighter, freer. By evening, the driveway was clear. The tree service had departed with a generous tip from Nathan, and we sat at the kitchen table over plates of hastily assembled pasta. Nathan had changed into jeans and a sweatshirt from his old bedroom closet, looking so much like the teenager who'd once done homework at this same table that my heart ached with the passage of time. I called an attorney in the city, I told him. We have an appointment tomorrow morning. Nathan nodded, twirling spaghetti around his fork. Good. We need to make sure everything's properly documented. Alexander called today. I told him my decision. How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. I hesitated. He brought up the adoption thing again. Nathan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully. Some things never change. I'm sorry. Don't be. It says more about him than it does about me. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What matters is that we're here. Together. And we're going to figure this out. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same stars Jonathan and I had gazed at all those years ago, dreaming of the future we would build together, a future that had included this farmhouse, these fields, these suns. One of those suns was trying to take it all away. The other had flown across an ocean to help me protect it. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. "Nathan," I said softly, "thank you for coming home." He smiled, the expression warming his tired eyes. "Mom, there was never any question. This is what family does. Family." The word echoed in my mind as we finished our simple meal, talking of small things, rebuilding the connection that distance had strained but never broken. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and documents, strategies and defenses. But tonight, sitting across from the son who had always honored the values Jonathan and I had tried to instill, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months' peace. Whatever Alexander and Isabella tried next, I wouldn't face it alone. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting golden rectangles on the oak table where Nathan and I sat finishing our coffee. He looked more rested after a night in his childhood bedroom, though jet lag still shadowed his eyes. "The attorney's office is downtown," he asked, checking his watch. "Yes, at 10. Her name is Diane Mercer. Grace recommended her, says she specializes in property and estate law." Nathan nodded, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Jonathan that my breath caught. "Good. We should bring copies of the deed, your will, and any documents Alexander's lawyer left. Already gathered them." I gestured to the folder on the counter. "Along with those loan records I found yesterday." A car horn sounded from the driveway. "That'll be Grace," I said, rising. She insisted on driving us. Grace Wilson was waiting in her practical sedan, silver hair gleaming in the morning light. She hugged Nathan fiercely when he approached. "Look at you," she said, holding him at arm's length. "All grown up and successful. Your father would be so proud." "It's good to see you, Mrs. Wilson," Nathan replied with genuine warmth. "It's just Grace now, honey. Has been for years." She turned to me. "Ready to show those city lawyers what Hartman women are made of?" I patted the folder of documents. "As ready as I'll ever be." The drive into the city took 40 minutes, Grace filling the time with updates on neighbors and local gossip that somehow managed to make Nathan laugh despite the tension of our mission. By the time we reached the gleaming office building downtown, I felt steadier, anchored by these two people who wanted nothing from me except my well-being. Diane Mercer's office occupied a corner of the 12th floor, with views of the river and city park. The attorney herself was a surprise younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with a no-nonsense manner that put me at ease immediately. "Mrs. Hartman," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "and this must be your son Nathan. Grace has told me about your situation." As we settled into comfortable chairs, I explained everything Alexander and Isabella's initial proposal, the revised offer, the hidden clause, the pressure tactics. Mercer listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk. "Let me be blunt. Mrs. Hartman, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of manipulation that borders on elder financial abuse." The term landed like a slap. "I wouldn't go that far," I protested. "Alexander is overeager, and Isabella is ambitious. But they wouldn't—" "Mom," Nathan interrupted gently. "They tried to trick you into signing away your rights to the entire farm. They sent a lawyer to pressure you when you were alone. They deliberately hid clauses in legal documents." Mercer nodded. "This isn't uncommon. Unfortunately, family members assume older relatives won't understand or notice legal details. They create artificial urgency to prevent proper review. They use emotional leverage in this case, a grandchild to influence decisions." I glanced at Grace, who raised an eyebrow as if to say, "I told you so." "What can we do?" I asked. "First, we document everything," Mercer said, pulling a legal pad toward her. "Every conversation, every promise, every document they've presented. Then we send a formal letter making your position clear. The farm is not for sale, in whole or in part." "They mentioned permits," Nathan added. "They're trying to file applications for development. Without your consent, those applications are meaningless," Mercer assured me. "But we'll address that in the letter as well, an explicit statement that you have not authorized any permit applications or development plans for your property." Twist number 5, as Mercer was speaking, Nathan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and excused himself to take the call in the hallway. When he returned a few minutes later, his expression had changed completely. "That was a colleague in the trademark division," he said, sitting back down. "I asked him to look into Heartland Fresh while I was on the plane. Mom, the name is already registered to an organic food company in Oregon. They've held the trademark for over 2 years. "Are you certain?" Mercer asked, immediately grasping the significance. Nathan nodded. "Absolutely. They've even sent cease and desist letters to other startups using similar names last year." I sat back, stunned by the implications. "So their entire business is built on a name they can't legally use," Nathan finished. "Either they never did basic due diligence or they knew and didn't care," I said slowly, "because they never expected to get that far. It was about the money all along," Grace muttered. "Just a scheme to get their hands on the farm's value." Mercer made a note. "This strengthens our position considerably. Not only were they pressuring you, Mrs. Hartman, but their entire business premise appears fundamentally flawed." By the time we left Mercer's office an hour later, I felt both relieved and saddened. The legal strategy was clear and would protect my interests, but the fact that I needed such protection from my own son weighed heavily on my heart. "Lunch," Grace suggested as we reached her car. "I think we could all use a break before heading back." We ended up at a small Italian restaurant near the park, where Nathan entertained us with stories of his legal work in Prague. He had a gift for finding humor in the most technical aspects of international law, and for a while, I was able to forget the reason for our visit to the city. "The firm's been talking about opening a satellite office here," he mentioned casually as we finished our meal. "They've got several U.S. clients who need European representation." "Here," I echoed. "You mean in this city?" Nathan nodded, stirring his coffee. "I've been considering it for a while. Even before all this happened." He glanced up, meeting my eyes. "I've missed home, Mom, missed you." The simple admission brought a lump to my throat. "I've missed you too." Back at the farm, I checked the answering machine while Nathan carried in groceries we'd picked up in town. The red light was blinking 3 messages. The first was from Isabella, her voice carefully controlled. "Evelyn, we need to talk about Alexander's conversation with you yesterday. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Please call us back." The second from Alexander was less measured. "Mom, you're making a huge mistake. We have investors waiting. We've already started the application process. You can't just shut this down because you're feeling sentimental." The third message made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Hartman, this is Marcus Reynolds. I understand you've decided against the Heartland Fresh proposal. While that's certainly your prerogative, I should inform you that my clients have already incurred significant expenses based on verbal assurances regarding the property. We may need to discuss potential remedies for these losses. Please call my office at your earliest convenience." Nathan had entered during the last message, his expression darkening as he listened. "They're threatening legal action," he said flatly, "based on verbal assurances that never happened." "What should we do?" I asked. The momentary peace of our lunch shattered. "Forward the message to Mercer. And don't call Reynolds back, not without her on the line." Nathan set down the grocery bags. "They're bluffing, Mom. They have no case." I wanted to believe him, but the cold, professional tone of Reynolds' voice had reignited all my fears. What if they sued? What if this dragged on for months or years, draining my limited savings in legal fees? Nathan seemed to read my thoughts. "Trust me. This is what I do for a living. Their threat has no substance, it's just another pressure tactic." That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, my phone rang, Alexander's number. I showed it to Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. "Put it on speaker," he suggested. I answered, my heart pounding. "Hello, Alexander. Mom." His voice sounded different, less demanding, more subdued. "We need to talk, face to face." "I've made my position clear," I said firmly. "The farm is not for sale." "I know, and I understand. But there are things we need to discuss. Important things." I glanced at Nathan, who gave me a cautious nod. When tomorrow Isabella and I could come to the farm, just to talk. No lawyers. After I hung up, Nathan looked thoughtful. "What do you think he wants?" "I don't know," I admitted. But he sounded different, almost defeated. We'll find out tomorrow. Nathan squeezed my hand. But whatever happens, remember you're not alone in this anymore. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. I found myself nervously straightening the living room, plumping cushions and dusting surfaces that didn't need dusting. Mom, Nathan said gently, watching from the doorway. It's okay. This is your home. You don't need to impress them. I set down the dust cloth with a sigh. I know. Old habits, I suppose. Alexander and Isabella arrived precisely at 10. From the window, I watched them approach Alexander looking tired and rumpled. Isabella still elegant despite her visible pregnancy, but with a tension in her posture I hadn't noticed before. Nathan opened the door before they could knock. Alexander, Isabella. His greeting was polite but reserved. They stepped into the living room, and for a moment, no one spoke. The tension was palpable, 4 people connected by blood and marriage, but divided by broken trust. Thank you for agreeing to see us, Isabella said finally, her usual confidence noticeably dimmed. Would you like coffee? I offered, falling back on hostess manners for lack of anything better to say. Please, Alexander said. In the kitchen, I moved through the familiar ritual of brewing coffee, grateful for the momentary escape. When I returned with a tray of mugs, they were all seated, Nathan and I on one side of the coffee table, Alexander and Isabella on the other. Alexander took a deep breath. Mom, Nathan, we owe you an apology. What we tried to do was wrong. The hidden clauses, the pressure tactics, all of it. He glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. We were desperate, and we convinced ourselves the end justified the means. The admission hung in the air between us. Why didn't you just ask for help? I said. If you were in financial trouble, why create this elaborate scheme? Alexander stared into his coffee. Pride, I guess, and shame. He gave a bitter laugh. Isabella and I were supposed to be the successful ones, the power couple with the perfect life. Instead, we're drowning in debt, about to lose our condo, with a baby on the way and no clear path forward. How bad is it? Nathan asked, his tone professional but gentle. Climax number 3, Alexander set down his mug, his hands visibly shaking. We're bankrupt, or we will be, once we file. We owe $60,000 on credit cards. The condo is underwater by about $30,000. Isabella lost her job 6 months ago, and I haven't had steady income since my tech support company folded last spring. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. And the investors, I asked. The permits, were those real? The permits were in process, Alexander admitted. But the investors? We had preliminary interest, nothing firm. We were counting on the farm as collateral to secure the real financing. And the trademark issue, Nathan pressed. Did you know Heartland Fresh was already registered? Isabella spoke up for the first time. We found out 2 weeks ago. I thought we could work around it, maybe buy the rights from the Oregon company, but we didn't have the cash. So the entire business plan was built on a name you couldn't legally use, Nathan stated flatly. The concept was sound, Isabella insisted, a flash of her old confidence returning. The farm-to-table market is growing. The execution was flawed. Flawed, I repeated. The words seemed woefully inadequate for what they'd attempted. Alexander leaned forward, his expression raw with emotion. Mom, I know we can't undo what we tried to do, but I need you to understand why. We're about to lose everything. The condo, our credit, our reputation. And with the baby coming... His voice broke. I was terrified. Isabella placed a hand on her rounded belly, her composure finally cracking. We both were. The admission of fear genuine, human fear pierced the armor of anger I'd built around my heart. For the first time, I saw not manipulative schemers but my son and his wife, frightened and desperate, making terrible choices from a place of panic. Fear doesn't excuse what you tried to do, I said quietly. No, it doesn't, Alexander agreed. Nothing does, but I hope it helps explain it. Nathan leaned forward. What's your plan now with the farm option off the table? Alexander and Isabella exchanged a glance. Bankruptcy, he said. Move to a cheaper apartment. Start over. With a newborn, Isabella added, her voice small. The room fell silent again. The future they described bleak and uncertain. I thought of my grandchild, not yet born but already facing instability and hardship. There might be another option, I said slowly, surprising myself. Not involving selling the farm, but perhaps using it differently. Alexander looked up, confusion mixing with cautious hope. What do you mean? The farm has that old caretaker's cottage behind the orchard, I explained. Your father and I renovated it years ago, thinking we might rent it out, but we never did. It's small, but it's a 2-bedroom. You, Isabella, and the baby could live there while you get back on your feet. The offer hung in the air, unexpected and transformative. You'd let us live here after everything? Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. You're my son, Alexander, and that baby is my grandchild. Family helps family through hard times. There would be conditions, Nathan added quickly, slipping into lawyer mode. A formal debt repayment plan, financial counseling, job search assistance for both of you. And you'd have to contribute to the farm, I continued. Real work, not just living here. The orchard needs attention. The vegetable garden could be expanded. Isabella looked around the farmhouse, then out the window at the fields beyond, seeing it, perhaps for the first time, not as a real estate opportunity, but as a potential home. It would be a significant adjustment, she said carefully. From our life in the city, yes, I agreed. It would. Alexander reached for her hand. But we'd be together, safe, with family. Isabella met my eyes, something new in her expression, not calculation or charm, but genuine vulnerability. Why would you do this, Evelyn, after how we treated you? Because that's what family does, I said simply. Real family. Alexander's composure finally broke. He put his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. After a moment's hesitation, I moved to sit beside him, placing a hand on his back as I'd done when he was a child, afraid of thunderstorms or disappointed by a lost game. It's going to be okay, I murmured. Not easy, but okay. Over his bowed head, I met Nathan's eyes. He gave me a small smile, sad but approving. We had a long road ahead, trust to rebuild, boundaries to establish, old wounds to heal. But in that moment, sitting in the living room where I'd raised my boys, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again, hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Nathan extended his stay, working remotely while helping me prepare the caretaker's cottage for Alexander and Isabella. We cleaned, painted, and furnished the small house with a mix of items from the farmhouse attic and affordable new pieces. Alexander and Isabella put their condo on the market as a short sale, began bankruptcy proceedings, and started the painful process of dismantling their urban life. Isabella, to my surprise, approached the transition with growing determination, researching local job opportunities and even helping with the cottage renovation when her pregnancy allowed. One evening, as Nathan and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he broached a subject we'd both been avoiding. I've been thinking about moving back, he said, his voice casual but his expression serious. Not just visiting, moving back permanently. To the farm, I asked, surprised. To the area. The firm's been talking about opening a satellite office in the city. I could head it up, split my time between here and Prague until it's established. I studied his face, looking for signs of sacrifice or obligation. Nathan, you don't have to do this because of me, or because of Alexander's situation. He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. I've been considering it for months, even before all this happened. He gestured toward the fields bathed in golden light. I've missed this, missed you, missed having roots. What about your career? Prague was such an opportunity. My career will be fine. International law can be practiced from anywhere these days. He hesitated. Besides, there's something to be said for being close to family, especially with a niece or nephew on the way. The thought of having both my sons nearby, of being present for my grandchild's early years, filled me with unexpected joy. I'd like that, I admitted. Very much. 2 days later, Alexander and Isabella moved into the cottage. The process was subdued, their belongings fitting easily into the small space, a stark contrast to the expansive city condo they'd left behind. Isabella arranged the nursery with care, her nesting instinct evident in every carefully considered detail. That evening, I invited them to dinner at the main house. As we gathered around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless family meals over the years, the conversation was awkward at first, all of us navigating this new relationship. I got a call about a job today, Isabella announced as we passed the salad. Part-time administrative position at the community college. Not what I'm used to, but it's flexible hours and they have good maternity benefits. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. And I'm meeting with the Small Business Development Center tomorrow, Alexander added. They offer free counseling for entrepreneurs. I thought maybe I could get some proper guidance this time. Nathan nodded approvingly. Smart move. They can help with realistic planning, market research, the fundamentals you might have missed before. Like trademark searches, Alexander said with a self-deprecating smile. The joke, small as it was, broke the tension. For the first time since this ordeal began, we laughed together, not fully healed, but heading in the right direction. After dinner, as Alexander and Isabella prepared to walk back to the cottage, I noticed Isabella lingering in the living room, studying the family photos on the mantel. That was taken at Nathan's college graduation, I said, joining her. She nodded, looking at the image of a younger Alexander with his arm around his brother. He was so proud that day. He told me once it was one of the happiest moments of his life, seeing Nathan succeed. The admission surprised me. He never told me that. There's a lot he doesn't say. Isabella turned to face me. Evelyn, I want you to know something. I truly believed in Heartland Fresh. It wasn't just about the money, at least not for me. She rested a hand on her belly. I wanted to build something for this baby. Something meaningful. I understand that, I said. But meaningful things take time, Isabella, and integrity. There are no shortcuts. I'm learning that. She glanced back at the photo. The hard way, as they walked down the path to the cottage, arms around each other against the evening chill. I thought about Isabella's words. Perhaps there had been genuine passion behind their scheme, however misguided and poorly executed. Perhaps they had wanted not just financial salvation, but purpose. Meaning, legacy. Things the farm had always provided, in its own quiet way. The next morning, Nathan announced he had a surprise planned and asked us all to meet at the edge of the orchard at noon. Alexander and Isabella arrived curious and slightly wary. I was equally mystified until I saw Grace's car approaching, followed by a nursery truck. What's this? I asked as Grace hurried toward us, spry as ever despite her 70 years. An apple tree, Nathan announced as the nursery worker carefully unloaded a potted sapling. A new variety developed at the university. Disease-resistant, cold-hardy, and supposedly produces the sweetest apples you've ever tasted. Alexander's expression shifted as understanding dawned. Like Dad used to do, he said softly. Planting a tree for each milestone. Exactly, Nathan nodded. I thought we could plant this one for the baby. Start a new tradition. I touched the sapling's delicate trunk, thinking of all the trees Jonathan had planted over the years, trees that now provided shade, beauty, and fruit throughout the property. Trees that marked the milestones of our family's life. It's perfect, I said together. The 5 of us carried the tree to a sunny spot near the edge of the orchard, where it would have room to grow for decades to come. Alexander dug the hole while Nathan and I prepared the soil. Isabella and Grace stood watching, offering advice and encouragement. As we lowered the tree into place, Alexander paused, looking at each of us in turn. I want to say something, he began, his voice thick with emotion. A month ago, I almost destroyed everything that mattered this farm, our family, Mom's trust. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I couldn't see the success that was already here. Isabella moved to his side, her hand finding his. We both were, she admitted. But we're learning. This tree, Alexander continued, gesturing to the sapling. "We'll grow as our child grows, and every time I look at it, I'll remember what I almost lost and what I found instead." I thought of Jonathan then, of how proud he would have been of this moment. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, and likely never would be, but because we were here, together, planting a tree for the future despite the storms we'd weathered. 3 months later, the April morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the farmhouse windows as I prepared a basket of fresh muffins and fruit. Today was a special day. Nathan was officially opening his firm's satellite office in the city, and we were all going to the small ceremony. A soft knock at the back door announced Isabella, the baby carrier in her hand. Inside, 2-week-old Lily Hartman slept peacefully, tiny fingers curled into fists, her dark hair a stark contrast to her pale skin. "Is Alexander almost ready?" I asked, peeking at my granddaughter with the wonder that hadn't diminished since her birth. "He's on his way, just finishing a call with that farmer from Oregon." Isabella set the carrier carefully on the kitchen table. "The partnership discussion is going well. He thinks they might be able to start the farm store project by fall." The Oregon farmer had been an unexpected development, the owner of the original Heartland Fresh trademark. Rather than pursuing legal action when he discovered Alexander's permit applications, he'd reached out through Nathan to discuss collaboration. His established organic produce company was looking to expand eastward, and our farm offered a perfect location for a small satellite operation. It wasn't the grandiose vision Alexander and Isabella had initially pitched. No processing facility, no restaurant, no hotel, just a modest farm store selling local produce and artisanal products, with potential for growth if the concept proved successful. But it was honest, sustainable, and built on genuine partnerships rather than shortcuts and schemes. Alexander appeared in the doorway, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The bankruptcy proceedings were nearly complete, wiping the slate clean while teaching hard but necessary lessons. The small cottage had proven surprisingly comfortable for their new family of 3, and Alexander's part-time teaching position at the community college had revealed an unexpected talent for education. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, bending to kiss Lily's forehead. "Just about," I replied, adding the last muffin to the basket. Nathan called. "He's picking up Grace on the way." As we drove to the city, I glanced in the rearview mirror at Alexander and Isabella in the back seat, their heads bent close over their daughter. They were different people now, humbled by failure, tempered by consequences, but also softened by parenthood and the simple rhythms of farm life. The trust wasn't fully rebuilt. There were still moments of tension, flashes of the old patterns, but each day brought small healings, tiny steps toward a new kind of family dynamic based on honesty rather than manipulation, support rather than exploitation. Nathan's new office occupied a modest suite in a renovated historic building downtown. As we entered the small reception area, I felt a surge of pride seeing his name on the door, Nathan Hartman, International Legal Services. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, a ribbon cutting, champagne toast, and speeches from the European partners who had flown in for the occasion. Nathan moved through the crowd with easy confidence, introducing Alexander and Isabella to colleagues, making a special point of highlighting my presence to everyone he spoke with. I couldn't have done this without my mother's support. I overheard him telling the managing partner, "She's the foundation of everything good in my life." Later, as the reception wound down, the 5 of us, Nathan, Alexander, Isabella, Lily, and I gathered by the large windows overlooking the city park. "To new beginnings," Nathan said, raising his glass. "And to strong foundations," Alexander added, meeting my eyes with genuine warmth. As we drove home in the golden afternoon light, Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier, I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, the betrayal that had nearly torn us apart, the painful truths that had to be faced, the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust and forging new relationships. Alexander had been wrong. I wasn't too old to understand dreams. I had simply recognized that some dreams are worth fighting for, even if they don't look like success to others. Even if they're as simple as a farm, a family, and the legacy of love that binds them together. The real dream had been here all along. Back at the farm, Alexander and Isabella took Lily to the cottage for her nap while I walked to the orchard to check on our newly planted tree. The sapling stood tall and straight, its tender leaves unfurling in the spring sunshine. Beside it, the mature trees Jonathan had planted decades ago were in full bloom, their branches heavy with pink and white blossoms promising another abundant harvest. Between the old and the new stretched the fields that had sustained us all the land that would remain intact, as we had intended. A legacy not of money or status or business success, but of perseverance, integrity, and love that spans generations. I placed my hand on the slender trunk of Lily's tree, feeling the vibrant life within. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, to the tree, to Jonathan's memory, to myself. All of us. And for the first time in a very long time, I truly believed it. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to see more stories like this one. Also, check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites. My daughter-in-law thought I was just a burden until she found my secret, and they mocked me at the class reunion until they saw who my husband was.